Well, good morning, colleagues. Thank you for that generous introduction, and I'm also actually very grateful for the spontaneous brief summary of Cumberland Lodge's purpose and work from Baroness Prashar to my left, because actually we have come home. This place is based on the very similar, if not the same, values as the Commonwealth, and we've been coming here for many a conference over the years, but it's been a while. I think it's 13 years since the Round Table was here last. And I don't know how many other birds of passage there are in the audience, but it does feel a little bit like coming back home to roost. But of course, a lot has happened in the Commonwealth and in all our own lives and in the world since we last met here. And in many ways, I think we're going to be looking at that set of questions in this morning's session. It picks up on some of the issues that were already surfacing in yesterday's sessions. I'm looking forward to the contributions of a very experienced expert and also varied panel. I'm sure we'll be covering the waterfront, as they say, through their three contributions. And particular, perhaps, looking to see, mindful of the interesting matrix that Paul presented yesterday, have we gone forwards? Have we gone back? Are we in a steady state on the issues that we're addressing this morning? Where are the dangers and where are the areas where we particularly need corrective action or progressive action? So without any more ado from myself, since we're already up against the clock, I'll hand over to my speakers. I won't introduce them at length with their biographies because you have those details in front of you, and to do so would just eat into their time. So if I may, I will just immediately pass the floor to, it's quite a heavy business passing the floor, isn't it? But metaphorically, pass the floor to Brian Spears from the Commonwealth Lawyers Association to kick us off this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Good morning, everybody. This is a very great honour and somewhat humbling for me to address such exalted company, and I hope what I say might be informative as to both the adoption, we hope, of what are called the Commonwealth media principles, but also to explain the labyrinthine process by which such decisions and adoptions are made. I come from Belfast in Northern Ireland, where I practice as a lawyer in my own law firm. But in 2019 in Livingstone, Zambia, I was given the honour of being elected as president of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association. That term of 2 years has become a period of 4 years in office, which will end, some would say, thank goodness, but it will end, I would say, thank goodness, at our conference in Goa in between the 5th and 9th of March this year. And the Commonwealth Lawyers Association really represents practitioners and its council, which comprises representatives from every Commonwealth jurisdiction, and Zimbabwe and Hong Kong as part of our council, has been working really tirelessly on upholding the rights and entitlements of the legal practitioner community. And we draw our council members from bar associations and law societies across the Commonwealth. The highlight, I suppose, of the CLA year is, or every other year, is its conference. And during the pandemic, we managed to have a Commonwealth Law Conference in Nassau, the Bahamas, in September 2021. And despite travel restrictions, both getting there and quarantine when you arrive home, we had 25 Commonwealth jurisdictions represented, and the good vibe from that has resulted in a really terrific response to our conference in Goa next month. Arif has name-checked me a couple of times yesterday in connection with the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, which took place last summer. And wearing another hat, I am the chair of the Commonwealth Games Ethics Commission, trying to enforce compliance with codes of conduct and behaviour from the officials that would attend a Commonwealth Games. And it is from those perspectives that I make my comments. I will not say too much about human rights. I think others on the panel will say that, but it was just interesting to note that in the communiqué from CHOGM just passed, paragraph 10 does say that the heads of government renewed their commitment to the Commonwealth fundamental values and reiterated their commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms, recognising that human rights are applicable in online and offline media, and they underscored a vibrant civil society, including human rights defenders in delivering good governance and democracy. Now, these are excellent words. It would be hard to gainsay those words, but part of my theme as I emerge through my comments will be that are words sufficient? And those are fine words to reaffirm a commitment to human rights and indeed to recognise human rights defenders. I have recently returned from Zimbabwe. I met the Zimbabwe human rights lawyers, and I met a prominent human rights defender called Beatrice Mtetwa. And I think that those human rights defenders would struggle about paragraph 10 in a CHOGM community that says they are recognised, respected and protected and upheld. Of more relevance perhaps to the question of democracy is the CHOGM observation in paragraph 14, where heads reaffirmed their commitment to the Commonwealth guidelines on election observation and called for efforts to be strengthened in improving democratic processes and institutions. So electoral observations are key, and the CLA has been pleased to provide electoral observers in a number of elections, including the one in Bahamas in 2019 and the Kenya elections, which were challenged, as we know, and were the outcome subsequently upheld. But one does again wonder about whether all the participants in elections are truly feeling that they are exercising a free and unencumbered part of the process. And we note that in Zimbabwe, elections are pending later this year. So with those very brief observations about human rights and democracy, I do wish to turn to press freedom. And Article 5 of the Charter of the Commonwealth says that we are committed to peaceful, open dialogue and the free flow of information, including through a responsible media, and to enhancing democratic traditions and strengthening democratic processes. That is the Charter. That's what we signed up to. The 10th anniversary is upon us. So peaceful, open dialogue, excellent. No intimidation, no following you home. Free flow of information, responsiveness to Freedom of Information Act, the obtaining of information, the shining a light into dark places, the opening of closed doors to see what is going on. That is our Commonwealth Charter. There are many here more steeped in this question of freedom of expression and media freedom than I, but I speak having been invited to present what are called the Commonwealth Principles on Freedom of Expression and the Role of the Media in Good Governance. Something of a mouthful. I will call them the Media Principles, but that's their full title. And I was invited to present these media principles to the Commonwealth Law Ministers meeting in Mauritius in November. And that was a humbling opportunity to represent what were 6 organisations that gave birth to the initial draft of the media principles. These 6 organisations were the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, the Commonwealth Legal Education Association, the Human Rights Initiative, the Commonwealth Journalists Association, the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, and the Commonwealth Lawyers Association. Now, let me just acknowledge that Sue is here from the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. William is here from the Commonwealth Journalists, as is Rita somewhere. And Venkat, the editor of the Round Table Journal, was also part of the group of these accredited organisations that drafted and produced the first version of the media principles. They were ready in March of 2018, and it has been a long process from then to November 2022, when the law ministers unanimously adopted them. In February 2021, the senior officials decided that they would have an expert working group. Now, given the expertise of those that I've already mentioned, it's interesting as a process that the Commonwealth would appoint an expert working group, but they did, and 26 member countries were represented. It was chaired by Jamaica, and they held 9 meetings from February 2021 to get the final version of the media principles ready for consideration in Mauritius. And there were alterations made to what the civic society organisations had drafted, and that vexed and frustrated some of those organisations. However, the view was taken that something was better than nothing, and to get the principles in their current form through to the point where they're recommended to the heads of government at next CHOGM was considered highly desirable. And they were considered at CHOGM, and the law ministers and CHOGM got slightly out of sequence, but they were considered at CHOGM by an excellent session chaired by Anne Gallagher. And one contributor from the floor, from Ghana, said, in Ghana we have freedom of expression. What we're concerned about is freedom after expression. And I thought that was a memorable way of putting this particular issue. I also encouraged the foreign ministers at the round table meeting in Kigali to accelerate their consideration and express disappointment that Kigali did not see the adoption of the media principles by heads. And so the CHOGM communique does say something about freedom of expression at paragraph 11. And they say that the heads stress the importance of the right to freedom of expression through peaceful open dialogue and free flow of information, a free, independent, responsible, pluralistic media. And they noted the work carried on by the expert working group. So there was at least some mention of these media principles there. And it was my pleasure really to see at the law ministers meeting that there was 16 separate jurisdictions contributed to the debate. They all spoke to differing degrees of enthusiasm, but they all spoke in favour. And the Secretary-General, in her inimitable style, said, well, colleagues, have we agreed these or not? And by a little bit of chivying, there was both positive affirmation and no dissent, and the conclusion was that they were unanimously recommending the adoption of the principles at the next CHOGM. Now, the outcome statement does reference the important role that the civic society accredited organisations played, and I hope that they will be permitted to continue to play that important role. And if I was to stop there, which unfortunately for you I'm not quite stopping there, you might think, media freedom is done. We've got the media principles, they're going to be recommended at CHOGM, all is well. Let me reverse slightly by looking to the parent of the media principles, which I believe was the Latimer House Principles. Latimer House adopted in Abuja in 2003. As a side observation, I took a day trip to Abuja in November to meet the Minister of Justice and the President of the Nigerian Bar Association, and noted that this year was the 20th anniversary of that meeting in Abuja, and the Secretary General at our Goa conference is asked to speak on Latimer House Principles 20 years on. So I look to Dr. Karen Brewer, who is very much the expert on the Latimer House Principles, and acknowledge her help to me in understanding these principles. But my point is that within the principles, you have a couple of quite relevant topics on media. Principle 9b says, government's transparency and accountability is promoted by an independent and vibrant media, which is responsible, objective and impartial and protected by law in its freedom to report and comment on public affairs. Now, this was 20 years ago. This is a terrific little paragraph, and this is part now of the fundamental Commonwealth values. So move on nearly 20 years and we get the daughter or son of Latimer House, which is the specific media principles, again endorsing how important it is for a democratic society to have media principles, to have a free and responsible press able to report and comment upon public affairs. Just incidentally, Latimer House Principle 10 talks about the importance of civic society organisations in the participation in the democratic process. So it is frustrating, to put it mildly, that Latimer House Principles have received so little traction and implementation. There is a toolkit. The organisations that gave rise to Latimer House stand ready, willing, and I believe able to teach the Latimer House Principles, to share learning, to encourage their awareness in parliaments, in judicial circles, and in legal practitioners. And yet, those toolkits have never once, Karen, been used. No one has been blessed with the learning contained within those principles. And I spoke to a couple of the law ministers at the Mauritius, and I saw this little book on one of the front desks in the law ministers' meeting, and I said to an Attorney General of a small jurisdiction, oh look, there's the Latimer House Principles, you'll be aware of them. What are they? I spoke to the law minister of one of our largest members in the Commonwealth, and that law minister too said, what are they? So there's lots of work to be done there, and thereby hangs my tale. The Commonwealth can make a difference in collecting the thoughts of people, in assembling gatherings such as this, in facilitating dialogue and communication, such as you have spoken about. But the real difference is in what I believe another member of the panel will speak about. The real difference will come when journalists are not harassed or threatened or killed, when there is an acknowledgement that the freedom to express your view is valued and exposes corruption and exposes and holds to account our leaders who are not acting transparently or are being held to account. I commend completely Sue's article in November of 2022, The Commonwealth and Media Freedom, and time does not permit me to quote what I wanted to from that. But the question for this panel is, can the Commonwealth make a difference? And I say the difference that can be made includes words, includes declarations, includes policies and principles. But the real difference requires implementation, monitoring, review, and the involvement of civic society in ensuring that the principles are given real-time, living and breathing life. My conclusion is a difference has been made by the adoption by the law ministers of the principles, but the tangible difference is to take the words and live them, take the words and implement them, take the words and commit resources and time to ensure that they do not remain words. And we make a difference, but we can do more. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker, whom I will introduce without further ado, and at hand, there's this heavy floor to her as well. Dr. Kiran Hassan, please. Yes, go to the podium. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Kiran Hassan, and I have been involved with the Institute of Commonwealth Studies in the Media Freedom Initiative since 2017. And I've had the opportunity to work with a very, very pronounced, valuable team of journalists who have actually really contributed to the media freedom principles, which have actually provided this kind of framework for the push forward to actually bring media freedom into the kind of forefront of the democratic debate across the Commonwealth. But I observing trends within the Commonwealth. We have to actually ask the right kind of questions while we are actually looking at global media right now. Global media has been in a bit of a flux, and it has changed drastically over the past 4 or 5 years. And I'm going to talk about, just briefly point out the kind of main kind of challenges that the global media is facing at the moment, and then I'm going to bring it into the context of Commonwealth. So some of the kind of mainstream challenges of global media at the moment is that there is violence and killings of journalists, there's poor employment opportunities protections, there's oppressive regimes, there's draconian laws, sedition charges against journalists. Media markets are being incredibly squeezed. There is a definite decline of trust in news. And honestly, there are incredibly hostile conditions that globally the mainstream traditional media is facing. And while this is happening, I mean, we have IFJ reported that there were 68 killings of journalists and media staff during 2022. Now, these are disturbing figures. And also, there is kind of rise of populist leaders because of how social media machinery has been used off late. A lot of people are aware of fake news and so on and so forth. In the context of the Commonwealth, we have a fantastic report, which has been a summary report, which has been supported by the Commonwealth Foundation, and it's on our website, which says that only 5 Commonwealth countries come up to the kind of 20, are in the top 20 places of the RSF index, which is Reporter Without Borders, they're the best countries for freedom of expression. So they are New Zealand, Jamaica, Seychelles, Namibia, and Canada. 2 countries within the Commonwealth actually make it to the top 30 countries which uphold freedom of expression, which is UK and Trinidad and Tobago. And then 11 Commonwealth countries are in the bottom third of ranked countries where the media environment is judged to be incredibly difficult. Bangladesh ranking 162 cites it's in a very serious category in the World Index. Now, these are all, this kind of trends are available on our summary report, which is available on our Institute of Commonwealth Studies website. And I would encourage all of you to go into all these figures if you want to understand the trends within the Commonwealth. Today, I will take the opportunity to talk about some incredibly problematic, three mainstream trends which not a lot of, which needs urgent attention. And I'm sorry, I will excuse that I'm probably the only speaker who's going to be using a PowerPoint at this point, but just to make these points incredibly important, we need to actually have a visual kind of backing to what we are facing at the moment. So this is the first slide where you see Beijing's global media influence 2022 in China, across the world. And this is by Freedom House report. Now, we always bring up the fact that what is China doing? And in this case, you can see that, you know, there are certain parts of the Commonwealth where the Chinese influence on the media space of the specific country is very high. Sometimes it's low. But these are the kind of like themes, or these are the kind of tools that we need to understand to what extent, what is China doing actually, whereby we say that, you know, China is actually encroaching the global media market. So there is, I mean, everybody knows that Beijing has a multi-pronged approach for actually going for making inroads, especially in Africa and certain parts of South Asia, for their kind of like for a kind of like media outreach. And there's a fantastic kind of study by a case study of Ghana by Emmanuel K. Dogbevi, which came in 2022, which shows that Africa's influence in media. And there are like 4 or 5 points where they say that, you know, it's typically investing in and providing African journalists with trips to China with a lot of economic incentivization. Then there is many times Chinese officials directly speak to government officials in Africa, actually saying that, you know, pressuring them to actually give a fantastic and a positive story about China. Thirdly, China is actually also investing heavily and independently in state-owned and independent-owned media organizations. And fourthly, lastly, it also has expansion of CGTN and China Daily, its own kind of like media, legs or arms within Africa. But that's Africa. But across the Commonwealth, there is a question. How does China twist the arm of the Western governments? And there is a visa weaponization policy that Beijing has taken into official consideration. For instance, on 2nd of November 2022, Canada's public broadcaster CBC announced that it would close its Beijing bureau after unnecessarily waiting for over 2 years for the regime to approve a work visa for its bureau correspondent, Philippe LeBlanc. It is not the first time that the Chinese authorities' policy of visa weaponization has obstructed journalists from reporting. And in recent years, I don't know if anybody of you have followed the spat between BBC and China during the coverage of COVID-19. So China actually has a very, very concerted and a very systematic policy of visa weaponization against any kind of Western journalists or any journalists who are critical of the current regime. That's something to be looked into. And finally, there is also, I would like to also show another kind of like show of soft power that China has been able to make, through which China has been able to make inroads into Western capitals, and which is actually not really mentioned enough Can you please, the next slide? So TikTok, this was one of the recent kind of like Welsh young people quitting their jobs for social media. Growing number of Welsh stars, who consider TikTok their full-time job. A recent Ofcom report found that young people in Wales spend more time on TikTok than young people in any other part of the UK. They are on the app for more than an hour daily, and 79% of the 15 to 24-year-olds who are online have a TikTok account. Now, that is disturbing, because we can actually close our eyes and see that the cat is not going to eat the pigeon, but actually the cat will eat the pigeon. And unless we do not have the facts straight, then I don't know what kind of policy initiatives are we going to take vis-a-vis China and its kind of like increasing influence in the global media space. My next global challenge is social media and the big mega business of the social media. I don't know how many of you are actually looking at this story, but obviously we know that Elon Musk has very recently taken over Twitter last year, and looming Twitter interest payments leaves Elon Musk with unpalatable options. Billionaire faces tough choices to meet financial obligations of takeover financed by $13 billion debt, Financial Times Daily, 15th January 2023. So Twitter at the moment, anybody of you who are actually very enthusiastic Twitter users, this is bad news for them. I would be sad myself because I wouldn't be able to follow Larry the cat's Twitter account, my most favorite. But the thing is that that's something to actually look into in terms of where social media's influence and where are we in terms of social media if we are going to be talking about social media in a multilateral governmental organization. And then also, equally, metaverse will be a slow death. Is Facebook losing its 100 billion gamble on virtual reality? Now, when I look at these two and some others, the big tech boys, I'm reminded of this Shakespearean quote. We are, as flies to wanton boys, are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. So all this kind of consolidated power in the hands of 3 and 4 individuals who can actually just pull out the plug of a kind of the most influential social media platform and then say, well, this is what it is. This is where I think this kind of consolidated power, media power in the hands of very few is a cause of huge concern. And what can the Commonwealth do about it? I can go about it later. I will tell about it later on. But this is something which has to be taken into account. We know that the European Union and the United Nations are already having conversations about it, but we definitely need more multilateral intergovernmental platforms really starting conversations on these issues. Because unless we are not going to be talking about this particular issue or regulating, starting a conversation on regulating putting in some kind of regulations for these big tech boys, I don't know where we are going to be in terms of digitization of the Commonwealth. Right. And what are the digital rights? I mean, this is where the confusion is. While these big tech boys are actually going and investing into metaverse and trying to really reinstate Donald Trump because they're taking these kind of one-man decisions, mad decisions at the top. what kind of options do we have as a 56 Commonwealth country intergovernmental platform? Now, I don't want to be invited to a metaverse version of the Cumberland Lodge next year. I would really rather very much prefer, because it actually is filling up deep pockets of some kind of social media conglomerate who's sitting in Los Angeles. I'd rather just actually have a kind of conversation which actually talks about where is all this going? And to be honest, what are the governments doing about it? The government has no clue to, or the desire to actually look into what these mega people are doing. Anyway, I would call them demigods, basically, or gods, probably. What are the kind of governments doing? And an equally important question, when we are talking about human rights and media human rights, we have to talk about digital rights now. Where are digital rights? So that has to be taken into account, because what most of the Commonwealth governments have been doing is they have been going for internet shutdowns, which is rather problematic. And especially because, for instance, India, the total has had 110 internet shutdowns only in 2021. And the year 2022, it had seen around 75 shutdowns up until the month of November. This is an alarming figure, because according to studies, India has suffered a loss of $174.6 million in the year 2022 alone because of these internet shutdowns, with the long-term shutdowns leading to drastic impacts on the livelihood of people, directly contributing to the loss of employment. So that's the internet shutdown does not just mean that you just have a kind of electoral outcome which is in your favor, but it actually has started to affect livelihoods for a lot of young people. Sorry, I'm just going to be quick. We have similar examples in Africa, but the last and the most important thing is, next slide, please. Media is still mostly failing to convey the urgency of the climate crisis. All these figures are from the Commonwealth countries, and this is all these images are in year 2022. And this is something which has to be taken into account in an incredibly urgent manner. I have had the opportunity to actually observe flood media coverage of 2010 in Pakistan. And I presented a paper on that. I wrote an academic paper, and it's still there if any of you are interested in actually looking at it. And the kind of policy recommendations that I had given at that time really went on deaf ears, with the result that we had to face floods of colossal biblical levels in the year 2022, with much more loss and damage. My question and my very, very critical point here is that when we are talking about the loss and damage debate, where are we where is the accountability of the media? I mean, where is media in all this? Because media has a role to educate. It has a role to alarm, and it has a role to actually monitor the local governance of the funds which are actually then allocated for these climate vulnerable communities. We don't have that. So this is another thing whereby the Commonwealth media can collaborate. Concluding, Commonwealth as a 56-member country platform can play a critical role in starting its own discussions on these very important issues around freedom of expression. What do we mean by freedom of expression if you're not even going to talk about these incredibly important and critical topics? We can actually go for these big words of, commitment and civil rights and human rights, but if you're not going to be tackling these big issues in the kind of media, global media scape, I don't know what we are doing. So the Commonwealth must start a conversation where Chinese increasing hegemony over the global media space and continuation to remain under an iron curtain vis-a-vis democratic information should be questioned. Commonwealth can collaborate on multi-governmental social media regulatory guidelines to challenge the meteoric rise and power of tech conglomerates like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, ByteDance China, Alibaba China, Tencent Inc. China. Like the EU's agreement, we need this to be called a Digital Service Act package. Unless we're not going to do anything about it, we're going to lag behind. And actually, we need as many voices as possible, as many platforms as possible, as multilateral intergovernmental platforms to hone in this, because this is going to be a need of the day and future. And how can the climate change media story be pushed across the Commonwealth? How can Commonwealth be the first multi-governmental platform to initiate a balanced and apolitical media discussion voicing the concerns of the most vulnerable climate challenge communities in the Commonwealth? I will finish with something. We need to make more demands as a multi-governmental platform of 56 countries. Climate crisis demands attention and accountability. Use of tech demands responsibility and regulation. Sorry, I'm just going to repeat that. So as a 56 Commonwealth country platform, what can we do? Use of tech demands responsibility and regulation. Climate crisis demands attention and accountability. Chinese secrecy demands inspection and scrutiny. If you're not going to be talking about these initiatives and bringing them in the forefront of our forthcoming debate or ongoing debate on media freedom initiative, I don't think that we will be ever able to engage either the young communities that we want to engage, or we're going to actually come up with any kind of cohesive, comprehensive policy. Thank you very much.
Without further ado, I will move immediately to Baroness Prashad to give us our third discussion points presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sandy, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, which I do with certain level of trepidation, because I know this room is full of people who've got on-the-ground frontline experience. I have been slightly removed, but what I'm going to give you is kind of an observer's view, a helicopter view of what I think is happening in terms of global, because, what are the global challenges? And in that context, what is the importance of the Commonwealth? And what I think should be the role of the Commonwealth going forward? So I hope that with a few remarks, there'll be a lot more kind of discussion, because I think we've got to slightly go beyond and think in terms of the future, because the change of pace is such that we need some acceleration in terms of reform. And having been here since yesterday, what I'm going to say is probably some repetition, but it'll be in my own words, the things that I feel need to be emphasized. So let me first talk a little bit about what are the global challenges and what is the nature of those challenges. They will not be new to you, but I think it's just worth keeping them in the forefront. I think the first one is the geopolitical shift which is taking place. I think we've talked already about China, India, but I think we've got to look at also the way the United States is beginning to behave and what its role is going to be, and not least the UK coming out of Brexit and the impact of the Ukraine war. But I think we've got to take account of the geopolitical shifts, you know, and in terms of what's happening to the world, and that must be in our forefront. The second issue, I think, is we've been talking about multilateralism. It's not just the question and the threat. I think what you're seeing is an emergence of very many local multilateral organizations across the world. And I think the countries are also beginning, to some extent, challenge the legitimacy of the Bretton Woods institutions. How relevant are they to the current situation? The second issue I think worth highlighting is what's happening to democracies across the world. It's not just in the Commonwealth, because I think democracy, in my view, is beginning to look unhinged. And what we've seen is the election of very populist leaders, and it's symptomatic of an overheated sort of political climate that increasingly appears unstable, riven with mistrust, mutual intolerance, and is fueled by very wild accusations, online bullying, and a dialogue of the deaf drowning each other without the voice. So I say that democracy is actually, as a concept, is fraying at the edges, even in the developing world. And it is looking very jaded, even here. And I think the danger is that we can become complacent and take it for granted. And I think that one of the reasons why there has been an onslaught on the values, because we did become rather complacent about it, and we begin not to notice. And I think these obviously include the conduct of regular elections, which of course remain the bedrock of democratic politics. But I think they also encompass, in my view, how the rule of law is applied, what is happening to our democratic legislatures, because, you know, from where I sit, I even see that in the UK Parliament, you know, the way the executive is encroaching and how even the parliamentary democracy is actually suffering, because, you know, we've had debates in there. So I think what is happening to legislators is very important. And of course, the independence of the judiciary and the free press. And I think while they appear to function as they ought to be, but I don't think they're delivering what they should be. I have what I call a hollowed out version of a democracy. And I think while the architecture of what we talk about, you know, free press, you know, rule of law, independent judiciary, elections, may remain intact, but I think we may even end up paying a kind of a lip service to those issues. And I think the appeal of the modern democracy, in my view, was its ability to some extent sort of deliver the long-term benefits for societies and providing voice for the citizens, even minorities, because in a way that was important. It was checks and balances. So I think we've got to really look at, you know, what's happening to democracy, because that has implications in terms of how, in my view, the Commonwealth itself should approach these issues. The second one already mentioned, I think, is the question of the information technology, which has completely altered the terms on which democracy must operate. Because we have become dependent on forms of communication and information sharing that we neither control nor fully actually understand. And I think some democracies, in fact, are being subverted without force or without violence, because I think there is a subversion of democracy, and I think we've seen this happen even in the developing world. And I think the current representative democracy, in my view, does not correct our biases, but to some extent probably feeds it. And this has fueled identity politics, nationalism, populism, and in some instances, even elected, you know, dictatorship and tyranny of the minorities. This is happening across the countries. And of course, the other global threats are the economic downturn, pandemics, greater economic disparity, climate change, cyber terrorism, artificial intelligence, and of course, technology controlled by large unaccountable companies, as has already been mentioned. So I think there's a danger that we can abdicate our democratic responsibilities to these new forces. And I think there's a danger that our world can become kind of inhabited by large corporations, you know, and undercut our democracy. And this is being fueled, I think, by our own addiction to online media, and is also, you know, driven by impulsive kind of behavior. So I think against that background, you know, what are the alternatives? What are the things that we really need to look at? I think we need, obviously, to rebuild and rehabilitate democracy. And in that context, I'm not just talking about representative democracy in terms of elections. I'm talking also about participatory democracy and parliamentary democracy. Because even in countries like Iceland and Finland, I think they are experimenting, you know, how direct democracy needs to work against what's going on. Now, against that background, what is the importance of the Commonwealth? I think Commonwealth, as we know, I mean, the world has shrunk, and of course we are reminded of this by the crises we face and how interdependent we all are. Because, you know, there may be surge in nationalism, there may be people looking inwards, but I think the reality is the interdependence has now become almost an imperative. And therefore, multilateral organizations matter. But I think, for me, the importance of the Commonwealth is that it offers some very unique networks of human linkages of so many people. And it was actually originally what I've always often reminded people when we get focused just on CHOGM, that it was the Commonwealth of people. And I think we must never forget that it is not just governmental Commonwealth, it's the Commonwealth of the people. And human networks that cross cultures are more valuable and important than ever before. And what's very important, and I think there's a danger, that some multilateral organizations become purely transactional. And I think the Commonwealth must not become transactional, because it is about human linkages. So I think in the Commonwealth, we have an ideal forum, a kind of a unique convening forum. As we've said, its size, shape, its modus operandi. It's not replicated in any other multi-organization that at least I am aware of. And of course, you all know that it's voluntary, the equal weight, the equal voice, shared values, all those things are important. And I think the voluntary and the non-treaty character of the Commonwealth accords well with what the sort of the independent aspirations of nations within the Commonwealth, and small and large. So Commonwealth as a value-based international organization, and with all its assets, is ideally placed to be a force of good, and has or should develop the capacity to respond to current challenges. I think it can become an organization which can help to create a world with partnerships where, and I use the word, habits of behavior that we would like to live in. I think it's the habits of behavior, and that's where linkages become important. It can be a beacon for illustrating how to engage and promote rule of law, democratic values. I think reference has been made, and as I said, you know, we all mourn the passing of the Queen, but as it was referenced yesterday, she did say that it was a kind of a new conception with the highest quality of human spirit of man, which is friendship, locality, desire for freedom and peace. And I think that is something we must keep in the forefront, because it is ultimately the values that actually matter, that unite us. And of course, we know that societies within the Commonwealth have changed too. But my contention is that if the Commonwealth does not adapt to new realities effectively and lead by example, particularly in championing the values which are the foundations of the Commonwealth, it will not realize its real potential and the contribution it can make as a force for good. And I think if we don't do that, we give the platform to skeptics, who say that Commonwealth is a duck, which I honestly do not believe, because I do think it has the potential. It's got the ingredients which are really suited to what's happening in the world today. Because even if you look at places like China and even Korea, they have started to promote what they see their soft power. And here we have a ready-made concept, which has the real potential. That is not to say I think the Commonwealth has evolved, it has changed, it has responded, and I think it was very evident from yesterday. And I think it's got a history it can be proud of. But I think the pace of change has to be accelerated, and opportunities for change have presented themselves. And this brings me back to the Commonwealth Charter, that we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Commonwealth Charter. And I remember in a debate in the House of Lords, when it was actually adopted in 2013, I spoke and said, here is a document which pulls together all the other things that we've been talking about, the Latimer Principles, the Harare Declaration. And the Charter very much encapsulates what those values are. And I think the significance of the Charter at the core of the Commonwealth membership is a unifying element. And it is, as I said, emphasized the value base of that. And I think we must not underestimate. And that should not be undermined. And it is a kind of the most important document which we have to bring into life and make it a reality, to support members, to build democratic societies, inclusive institutions, strengthen the governance, and promote justice and human rights. And of course, this is where that is the role of the Commonwealth, CMAG, the Secretary General's good officers, and so on. And I think that while the work has been done by the Commonwealth Secretariat, and very effectively, and obviously is on the observance of elections, and it is something which has been doing for the last 40 years, and indeed it sort of changed and produced new guidelines in 2018 to sort of bring in other aspects, not just election observation, I think is very important. And in preparation for this contribution this morning, I read all the relevant papers, not least the Kigali communication and all the work that has been done. It's all very impressive. The words are there. But my question really is, are we actually delivering what is being delivered? And therefore, and it's the what, I think is equally going to be the how we are going to actually deliver that. And we heard yesterday that there's been an expansion of the Commonwealth. And there was an interesting debate last night, when does it stop? And it did bring mind, and somebody raised it. There was a similar debate about widening or deepening Europe. And I think it's a similar debate about the Commonwealth. Is it widening or deepening the Commonwealth? And if I may just give you that Britain was keen for the widening of Europe for its own interests, because they did not want a deeper Europe. And the reason we came out, I think, is actually evidence of that. And I don't think it's a question of thinking, we will take this, it's pragmatic to take Rwanda in or Mozambique in and see it as a kind of flagship thing, people are queuing up to join. Very flattering. But I would question the motivation of people, why they're wanting to join, what are the reasons. But I think a debate has to be had about whether we want to deepen or widen the Commonwealth. And I think it's important, this is a personal view, that in deepening it, we would deepen the values. Because, unless the core of the Commonwealth is strong, if you widen it, you will dilute its values. And at the moment, I think The values are there, they're on paper, but we need to really make sure they become ingrained both in the psyche and the DNA of those who are members. So I think it's a debate to be had. As I said, I'm not dogmatic about it, but I think it's something which we need to actually look at. Then my other question really is about the reform and the renewal of the Commonwealth. I have for a long time taken the view that given the complexity, but even before that, going back to my point about Commonwealth of the people, it's about engagement with the non-governmental civic societies, grassroots. And what we really need to look at is how do we engage with the young people, how do we engage with the Commonwealth ecosystem, with non-governmental organizations, and how we become a kind of an organization, or Secretariat becomes an organization which is an enabling body, engages and makes work bottom up. I wasn't here to listen, but what I could sense from what was being said about the blue strategy, the working with the grassroots, may well be an example. There may be examples there. But I think that the danger has been, it's been top down, and we've not really had the meaningful engagement, because, you know, people are, in this room are working in the media, you're working with the trade unions, you know, there's a whole range, a myriad of organizations. And I think it will multiply its effectiveness. It is actually engaged. And the other point I do take, and this brings me to my point about participatory democracy, that it is through active engagement, through civil society, people learn democracy. When I was talking earlier about Cumberland Lodge, one of my mottos here is teaching young people to disagree well, because it's really how you model those behaviors where you actually make sure that democracy becomes part of your DNA. So it's not just voting every 4 years or 2 years, it's the actual behaviors. And I think the network of the non-governmental organizations which are around, they shouldn't just be focused on what the subject matter they're involved in, they should be mirroring the behaviors and the values. Therefore, you're actually, through that engagement, teaching young people about that. So I think, from my point of view, the importance of human rights, democracy, rule of law is absolutely fundamental. These are the values which the world needs. The Commonwealth is an excellent vehicle for that, but it really needs to look at how it's organized going forward. And it's something which I have written about. I've given some, you know, not written, but made speeches in the Lords about. But I always get stuck in terms of, and someone asked the question last night, you know, how do you start this reform? Because it's a massive shift in the organization. And I think one needs to really think that through. And the opportunity is really now, although we are 10 years late, because you see, when the Charter was adopted, I was urging for that to happen now. I think we're lagging behind. But we have 2 years, about 18 months. You know, I think we should be thinking about the kind of Secretary General you want. And I was pleased that Sue last night shared something we've said for a long time, that the election or the selection of the Secretary General should be an open process. Some thought to be given to the kind of Secretary General you want. You know, any other organization I work with, you have a job description, you look where the organization is going, you appoint the person. But at the same time, I think somewhere along the line, whether it's the governments themselves need to think about what kind of Commonwealth we want going forward, and against that background, what kind of organization we actually want. But I do take the view is that, and I think it was Duke of Edinburgh who said, Commonwealth works regardless of the Secretariat. He wasn't being critical of it. He was basically saying, that's only one part of it. Commonwealth is much more than just the Secretariat. And I think we've got to harness the broader networks of that and really begin to think. And I think if we don't grasp this opportunity now and sort of muddle along to the next jogum and the same thing continues, then I think we are in a pretty difficult position. It's a major task, but on the other hand, I think it's not, if you get the concept right, that the Centre of the Secretariat is an enabling body, is almost like a facilitator, which will strengthen the infrastructure and work with NGOs, I think there is an opportunity. I will say, I mean, the term I coined, I was thinking that, you know, we have the recipe, but it's not oven ready yet. And I think that's something we've got to think about. Before I end, I just want to make one comment. I think I was interested, very interested, and quite inspired by Sue's talk last night. But I think, Sue, one thing I would say to you about the role of the monarchy here, I took the view, that, I take a very pragmatic view. I thought it was a stroke of genius that the Queen managed to get a kind of a smooth transition to Prince Charles. Because I think if we get into that debate, it will detract from this reform. And I think Commonwealth will stand by what it does, right? And like you, I was asked, what should be the role of the new monarch? And I think the difficulty we have here is riding two horses, both as the UK, because he is the constitutional monarch, but he's the head of the Commonwealth as well. And my answer was that here's his opportunity where he can actually combine the two, because we are struggling in this country about inclusive society. There's balkanization. You have the values of the Charter to conflate. So he could, through his behavior and action, be the unifying force around values. So I think it could be a work which can work well. So I think it would be a pity if we got detracted by that particular debate, whereas I rather concentrated on the reform of the Commonwealth itself. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our panel. You'll be aware that we're running very short of time. I apologise for that. We were a little delayed getting started. I will open the floor now. I'm seeing a number of hands up. And if I do invite you to speak, you must please be brief. No auto-hagiographies, no expansive statements, just a simple question. And if you go on too long, I will ask you to abbreviate yourself, if one can use such a phrase. So, questions from the floor, please, preferably from those who have not yet put a point or a question. Okay, I recognise this gentleman in the front row. Please forgive me in advance if I don't know all your names. Go ahead, and I will take 2 or 3 or possibly 4 questions, brief questions, before inviting the panel to respond. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be very brief. In an opinion piece published in the Roundtable, just after the London CHOGM, it's called the 3 Challenges for the Commonwealth or something like that. And one of the suggestions I've made there is that the Commonwealth should start a media channel of its own in order to address some of the problems that the panel has picked up. I've given reasons why it should be and how it can be funded, etc. I'm not going into that, but the main question is, does the panel think that starting a channel would be the solution for the the challenges that they've raised?
Thank you. Next question. I'm looking for hands that have not gone up before. Okay, it's failing that. Richard, and then the gentleman next to Richard also had his hand up.
Very quickly, my question is, so what could the Commonwealth of People do to build human rights? I've spent 25 years in that field, very disappointed, now feel that governments can do very little. And so the answer does lie with, for example, a journalist in India who now uses the climate crisis. That's the order from the editor of the Hindustan Times. I would like to think that lawyers are now using the Commonwealth Charter and Latimer House in their pleas. We've got to do something ourselves because the governments won't, in my view, but I'd like to hear your view.
Thank you, Richard. If you pass the microphone. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
William Horsley. Quickly on a sort of point of information for the room, Brian's excellent presentation mentioned that the law ministers recommended the principles to the CHOGM. It's important to know that in the text, the outcome statement, the word approved and adopted is there for the law ministers. This is a sort of Commonwealth ambiguity. But on the key question of words or action, which, Brian, you also addressed, I heard yesterday from the Secretary-General an assertion that good offices were being used in many cases to make a difference. The position that I understand from civil society is that we don't see the implementation. And one particular thing, which perhaps I'd ask Brian in particular to respond to, is the statistic from UNESCO, which, by the way, the Commonwealth has declined to engage with on these issues. It's the lead program with a 10-year UN action plan. Their statistic is that in Commonwealth countries, the rate of impunity in cases of killings of journalists, which are more than 200 in the last 15 or so years, is 96%. Now, for an organization which stands for the rule of law, this is surely intolerable. So action or words, Brian?
I'll invite the panel to respond to those first three questions, and we'll see how we go with the time after that. Any particular preferences to who goes first? Brian, would you like to?
Well, once again, I was sort of name-checked there, so I better deal with William's point. There are many examples of human rights defenders, public interest lawyers, taking steps to challenge governments to judicially review decisions and to highlight the type of breaches of the rule of law that has been mentioned. And I do not see that dimming or reducing, but there are more examples of governments taking steps that are unacceptable according to the standards of rule of law. And all that we can do is continue to highlight the importance of rule of law, to explain what that means to have an independent judiciary. In a couple of respects, and Karen will know that an independent judiciary can be undermined by the actions of a zealous and autocratic regime. And lawyers do speak up. We sent an observer to Kiribati to see what in this connection was a ludicrous hearing into a judge who was under attack from the executive. So lawyers do something. We're not the only cure. It's also important that lawyers take legal action on the basis of the law, on the basis of policy, on the basis of inconsistencies with policy, and therefore that is important why we at least have the words. Without the words, the legal action is more challenging. I also want to say that on questions such as child marriage, child sexual exploitation, the lawyers have taken action in a number of countries, and these need to continue. There are lots of inequities out there that very committed colleagues are taking steps to try and hold governments to account. But even here in the UK, we have challenging issues around judicial review. With regard to media freedom, I don't understand what was the problem of making the executives in these large media companies criminally responsible for their content, and I'm not quite sure why that created some hesitation in the government, and it took some sort of backbench rebellion to ensure that be done. So let us all continue to speak, and let these gatherings continue to re-energize us and to collaborate, and together we hopefully will be stronger.
Thank you, Brian. Kiran, do you want to come back on your points?
I would like to say that, media freedom should not be considered as a monolithic term. It's a problematic term in the current context. I don't even know what we understand by media freedom. It's an old-fashioned term. We need to start asking fresh questions We need to coin the debate in new terms, considering what the global media environment is at the moment. And I would actually, I think a climate change, a kind of like a collective, Chandra's point of channel by the Commonwealth might be a good idea, but we will have faced probably issues around corporate who funds it, and then narrative building, but a strong editorial team and a strong editorial policy can be somewhat effective way to actually have an outreach towards vulnerable communities in the global south. So that's good for influence building. Or a web portal. It could be a web portal, because a lot of the kind of like global south communities within the Commonwealth are now very mobile efficient. But we need to come up with different tools of engagement, which will also rebrand the name of the Commonwealth, encourage youth to be more involved with the Commonwealth values. We just need to have a very different approach. Sorry.
Yes, I'm just reminded in response to the questions of the four things that was stated when UK was chair in office. They said they will judge it on 4 grounds. One was a delivery, voice, solidarity, and reform. And I think those are quite useful concepts to actually think about, because we've heard a great deal about delivery and implementation, and I think that has to be looked at, and it's the how that matters. And I think, Richard, you're right. That we can't just rely on governments. It has to be the solidarity between non-governmental organizations, and how we strengthen that infrastructure, I think, is going to be very important. The other thing is the voice, and whether we have a channel, I think we've got to think in terms of how do we communicate, how the voice is actually used to condemn what's going on, to reinforce the values, and all of that. So the voice has to look at different ways, mediums through which the voice of the Commonwealth is actually heard. And then, of course, the reform very much in terms of how do we reform the institutions, because the Commonwealth Foundation is there, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, working together, because I'm not sure that, the Commonwealth ecosystem works together in tandem. And I mean, there's more competition than collaboration. And we cannot do this without collaboration and dialogue.
Thank you very much. I'm in your hands, colleagues. We're 5 minutes over. We were 5 or 10 minutes late starting. I could take a couple more very brief questions with very brief response from the panel, if that's okay with the organisers. Okay, I'm going to recognise just 2 more who had their hands up before. That's Amitav and Karen. I'll ask you to be brief, and then I will revert to the panel and wrap things up. Sorry, I can't recognise everybody who's been flagging my gaze. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your indulgence, Sandy. And mine is not a question, it's a comment. And if I may put it, it's really a cri de coeur in response to those excellent presentations. I lived through the Commonwealth through a very exciting time. We started election observation in its new sort of post-1980 Uganda incarnation and kept honing it. We had the Secretary General's good offices, and then we had this institution called CMAG. When I used to go to meet my opposite number in Paris at the Francophonie, they were just full of admiration and indeed incredulity that you could have an organization, a multilateral organization that could suspend countries. It wasn't just small countries like the Gambia or Fiji that were suspended. It was Nigeria, it was Pakistan, big countries. So they were living up to those values. And our profile in the Commonwealth increased, respect for us increased. The UN started taking us more seriously. And it made us much more relevant. Today, I fear, and this has been talked about, the reverse trend is very worrying, and I think it will hurt us deeply. All the other bits of the perfect storm that have been talked about, the effect of COVID, the effect of the Ukraine war, it's just going to make things worse. And I hope that we can actually stymie the going downhill. Yesterday, the Secretary General did mention that 16 countries have been the subject of her good offices. Well, that's wonderful news, but it would, I think, help all of us to know a little bit more without sacrificing her ability to make a difference, because sometimes confidentiality and discretion is indeed very important. But if we were to lose what we have so painstakingly achieved over the years and gained, then I think it would be very, very bad. And I would strongly endorse Baroness Pruscia's slogan there. Let's not be too worked up about expanding. Let's do deepening. Gabon and Togo have come in. How are you going to keep Zimbabwe out? I mean, you're going to be credible with Zimbabwe when they say we are a country of long Commonwealth standing, but you're letting in these people, and will you have any conviction? Anyway, I'm sorry. This is my cri de coeur, and I apologize for having eaten into your coffee time.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Amitav. And Karen, if you could be brief, and then we'll go to the panel.
Yes, just very quickly. In actual fact, I think Richard and Usha basically said what I was going to say. When we were talking about the Latimer House principles, we initiated, as the 4 organisations that were involved in Latimer House, plans of action. We were the ones that were initiating the plans of action. Okay, they haven't been necessarily endorsed by governments, but we work within our own organisations to advance the implementation of the Latimer House principles. And I think there is a need for us as organisations here and as Commonwealth organisations to start those processes once again. We used to have talks about leadership of the Commonwealth. We used to have talks about, and we used to make recommendations to the Commonwealth as a whole. And I think we may need to relaunch these type of programs so that we can actually do that. So it's just a comment as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'll revert briefly to the panel. We have, and ask the panelists also to be brief. I'm sorry to have to be the whip hand here. Karen, would you like to go first? Anything to say? No.
I would say that, we have a huge opportunity to engage media at this moment. It's an indexical moment for a multilateral organization like the Commonwealth. And it is a tool which can actually have the biggest influence and outreach in the Commonwealth youth. And I every time struggle to understand why aren't we actually having a kind of comprehensive, systematic media policy towards the engagement of the youth in the Commonwealth, with all the kind of attractive topics, just talking about, that in itself is going to be rebranding everything and answering a lot of critical questions.
Thank you. Brian?
I find it really problematic to be part of an organisation such as the Commonwealth with no sanction being taken against those who are demonstrably operating outside our values. So the lack of clear enforcement and sanction, I think, is a problem, and that comment is stimulated by your remark. It might be of interest for some to know that I was in Zimbabwe in November and met senior party officials and 2 cabinet ministers, as well as the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, and did form the impression that they will say, if you let these others in, why are we denied entry? And actually the media is commenting, well, if you let Zimbabwe in, that somehow reduces the credibility of the Commonwealth. But they say, well, we're no worse, in fact, better than others that have already been admitted. So if we are serious in the Commonwealth about upholding values, we need to apply standards and show the yellow card and, if necessary, show the red card.
Can I just say I really endorse that, because I think what we need, particularly now, is a strong Commonwealth. if we are seen to be a weak Commonwealth, we would be used by other bodies. And not least, if I may say so, UK rights two horses. I mean, Gabon and trade and getting them, and I even heard they wanted Ukraine to become members, you know what I mean? Now, if you really want a strong Commonwealth, I think we've got to stand for the values and actually show our teeth in terms of where it matters. And I think that will win it respect. And I think it's needed more than ever. And I have a passionate belief in the Commonwealth. And I can tell you, I'm really encouraged that people I've been working with are still in this room, fighting away for it. So I would say, keep fighting, because we need to build a strong Commonwealth. It is a force for good, and the world needs it. And therefore, I think I would urge non-governmental organizations, yourselves and others, to really continue to build a strong Commonwealth.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I'm aware we're over time. Thank you also yourselves, our audience, for participating so and engaging so fully. Just to wrap, thank you to the panelists in particular for speaking some uncomfortable truths, breaking a few omertas that we've been perhaps self-imposing on ourselves a little too long, holding up the mirror in terms of subversion and erosion of democracy in all our countries, including this one, raising the importance of separation of powers and media power or misuse of power, and answering my question in part, I think, with the question I posed at the start about are we in fact going backwards or forwards. I think there were some alarm bells ringing, which actually redoubles the point that all our speakers made, which is that action is needed and not just fine words. So thank you all very much. I'm aware we're over time. I hope you can enjoy guzzling a coffee slightly more quickly than might be comfortable. Thank you.